Imagine a product so powerful that it generates profit without producing anything tangible. A product so invisible that most people don't even realize they buy it every single day of their lives. That product is debt. Far from being a neutral financial tool, debt has been deliberately engineered into the most profitable product in human history. It has funded wars, collapsed empires, enslaved nations, and quietly drained wealth from ordinary people for centuries. Yet ask most people where debt came from, who designed it, or why it dominates our financial system. They couldn't answer. Because the history of debt is not just economic history. It is the story of money and power itself. At its simplest, debt is a promise. Borrow today, repay tomorrow. But hidden inside that promise is the true mechanism of control. Interest turns time into profit. It allows the future to be harvested for wealth in the present. Ancient societies understood the danger. In Mesopotamia, debts were recorded on clay tablets, but they were also periodically erased through debt jubilees. Rulers knew that when too many citizens became trapped in obligations, society would collapse. In the Hebrew Bible, debt forgiveness was mandated every 50 years. The logic was clear. Unchecked debt could enslave entire populations. But elites learned not to erase debt. They learned to weaponize it. In medieval Europe, the Catholic Church banned usury, the charging of excessive interest. Yet merchants and bankers found ways around it. Loans were disguised as trade agreements, partnerships, or complex credit instruments. By the Renaissance, powerful banking families, the Medici of Florence, built empires, not through land or armies, but through lending. They financed kings, popes, and merchants. In return, they gained not only wealth, but political leverage. Debt had become more than a financial transaction. It had become an engine of power. The true transformation came in the 17th century with state debt. When the Dutch Republic fought for independence from Spain, it raised money by selling bonds to citizens. Investors bought government debt, earned interest, and traded those bonds like property. For the first time, war was no longer limited by the gold in a king's treasury. It could be financed indefinitely by selling the future. England copied this model. In 1694, the Bank of England formalized national debt as a permanent institution. Governments no longer borrowed only in emergencies. They lived on debt, rolling it over endlessly. Bankers became indispensable, and debt became the foundation of modern government power. The profits were enormous. Lending to governments was the safest investment in the world, because states could always raise taxes to pay creditors. Wars that once would have bankrupted monarchs could continue for decades. And those wars expanded empires, opened markets, and created more demand for debt. By the 18th and 19th centuries, bond markets in London, Paris, and Amsterdam had become the beating heart of global finance. Armies marched, ships sailed, and colonies were conquered, all on borrowed money. Eventually, debt spread beyond governments and elites. Industrial capitalism pulled ordinary people into the system. Railroads, factories, and infrastructure were built on credit. Workers earned wages from debt-financed companies and then borrowed themselves to buy homes, tools, and goods. By the 20th century, debt was no longer exceptional, it was normal. Mortgages, car loans, credit cards, and student debt turned borrowing into the default condition of modern life. And here lies the hidden genius or cruelty of debt. It doesn't generate profit once. Every interest payment transfers wealth from debtor to creditor, from the many to the few, month after month, year after year. A home purchased with a 30-year mortgage often costs 2 or 3 times its original price. A credit card balance rolled over can grow faster than income. What begins as a promise slowly becomes a trap. Debt is not just a financial arrangement. It is the most successful business model ever created. It requires no factories, no inventory, no raw materials, creates wealth from time itself. Those who understood this early, the merchants of Amsterdam, the bankers of London. The financiers of Wall Street designed the modern financial system not to eliminate debt, but to manufacture and expand it. By the mid-20th century, debt had become the lifeblood of the global economy. The Bretton Woods Agreements of 1944, often praised as a triumph of cooperation, institutionalized this reality. The IMF and World Bank were created to lend to nations in crisis or development, but behind the rhetoric was discipline through debt. Loans came with conditions. Governments were told what to cut, what to privatize, and how to restructure their economies. Sovereignty quietly shifted from national capitals to financial institutions in Washington and Basel. Debt became not just profitable, but political. At the same time, banks discovered something even more powerful: selling debt directly to households. Mortgages became the centerpiece of middle-class life. Car loans, installment plans, and credit cards transformed debt into a consumer product. The psychological shift was profound. Debt was no longer shameful. It was marketed as freedom. Buy now, pay later, enjoy today. Let the future worry about itself. For banks, this meant steady compounding profits for millions of people. For governments, it created the illusion of growth even as wages stagnated. For corporations, it guaranteed consumers who could spend money they didn't yet have. Debt became infinitely scalable. All it required were contracts, signatures, and the authority to create money from promises. But the system became addicted. Banks didn't want debts repaid, they wanted them extended. Governments preferred borrowing to taxing. Politicians pushed costs onto future generations. Central banks ensured enough liquidity to keep everything moving. Debt was no longer a bridge, it was the architecture. By the 1970s and 1980s, the consequences became impossible to ignore. Developing nations across Latin America, Africa, and Asia had borrowed heavily during boom years, encouraged by Western banks recycling petrodollars. When interest rates soared under Federal Reserve Chairman Paul Volcker, those debts became unpayable. The crisis exploded in 1982 when Mexico announced it could no longer service its loans. And the world was forced to confront a truth that still defines our age: when debt becomes permanent, control follows. The solution offered was always the same: more loans under harsher conditions, administered by the IMF and World Bank. Debt became a trap. Countries borrowed to survive, then borrowed again just to repay what they already owed. With every cycle, they surrendered more control over their economies. Ordinary citizens paid the price through austerity, inflation, and unemployment, while elites and international creditors collected interest. In the developed world, the financial industry discovered something even more lucrative: selling debt itself. Mortgages, car loans, and corporate bonds were bundled into complex securities and traded globally. Debt was no longer merely an agreement between borrower and lender. It became a commodity, licensed, repackaged, and sold to investors worldwide. Wall Street gradually shifted away from producing real goods and toward engineering financial instruments. This transformation, known as financialization, turned credit into the most important raw material of the modern age. The profits were staggering. A bank could issue a loan, sell it to investors, and immediately move on to the next one, earning fees at every step. Risk was supposedly spread, but in reality, it was only concealed. That moment arrived in 2008, trillions of dollars in mortgage-backed securities built on the assumption that American homeowners would never default, and mass collapsed. Debt had been stretched beyond reality, and when it snapped, the entire global financial system trembled. Governments intervened, not to punish those who created toxic debt, but to rescue them. Ordinary families lost homes, jobs, and savings. Banks received bailouts. And after the dust settled, debt did not shrink, it expanded. Central banks slashed interest rates and flooded markets with liquidity. Debt was no longer just profitable, it became indispensable. Governments relied on it to fund deficits. Corporations used it to finance stock buybacks. Households depended on it to maintain living standards. Without constant borrowing, the system would collapse. Global debt now exceeds $300 trillion, more than 3 times the world's annual economic output. Never in history has humanity owed so much to so few. Yet this mountain of obligations is celebrated as growth. Rising GDP figures mask a simple truth: much of today's prosperity is borrowed from the future. Debt has become so normalized that it rarely raises questions. A 20-year-old takes on student loans and is told it's an investment in their future. A couple signs a 30-year mortgage and calls it success. Governments run deficits year after year, and voters barely notice because the consequences are delayed. Inflation acts as the hidden tax, quietly eroding purchasing power while preserving the debt system. Debt now concentrates wealth like never before. Every interest payment funnels money upward from millions of households to the largest banks and investment funds. Those with assets borrow cheaply, leveraging wealth into more wealth. Those without assets borrow expensively, trapped in cycles of repayment. Debt becomes a polished mirror of class division. And now, as central banks explore central bank digital currencies, the next evolution of debt is already forming. Programmable money, fully traceable transactions. Loans automatically approved or denied by algorithms. Interest rates adjusted in real time. Penalties enforced instantly by code. Efficiency for the creditor means less freedom for the debtor. The most profitable product in history is being upgraded for the digital age I designed, once again behind closed doors. Far from public scrutiny, debt is not neutral. It is not a natural feature of modern life, nor merely a tool for progress. It has been deliberately cultivated as the most profitable product ever, a system that turns time into money, and human effort into streams of interest flowing upward. To understand debt is to understand that financial freedom will never be handed to you by a system that depends on your obligation. Real wealth begins with minimizing dependence on borrowing, questioning the promise of easy credit, and recognizing that behind every loan is a machine designed to profit from your future. History does not repeat, but the pattern remains. From clay tablets of Mesopotamia to suburban mortgages, from Dutch bond markets to Wall Street derivatives, the story is the same. Debt enriches the creditor, burdens the debtor, and reshapes the world in favor of those who control money. And the cruelest trick of all, we're taught to celebrate it, to call it progress, and to mistake borrowing for prosperity. If this gave you a new perspective, subscribe. History has the answers, will show you where to look.